Good morning, students. Today, in the series of the blood vascular system of Pila, this is the second lecture. Myself, Dr. BALRAM SAIN, Assistant Professor in Zoology, Government Unga College, Bikaner. Blood vascular system of Pila. In the previous lecture, we had discussed the various organs involved in the vascular system. We had discussed about the pericardium, which is a thin-walled ovate sac lying dorsally on the left side of the body wall behind the mental cavity. Then we had discussed about the heart consisting of one auricle and ventricle. Then we had discussed about the arteries. From the ventricle part arises the aorta or the aortic trunk, which divided into two branches, the cephalic aorta and the visceral aorta. And in today's lecture, our main focus will be on the various sinuses involved in the blood vascular system of Pila, various veins through which the blood flows, and the pathway of the blood circulation. So, coming straight away to the topic, sinuses. The blood, after being distributed to the various parts of the body through the arteries and their branches, passes into small lacunae, which in turn unite to form large sinuses. There are four chief sinuses in the body, the pila. These are the anterior perivisceral sinus, anterior periintestinal sinus, bronchorenal sinus, and pulmonary sinus. Now we will discuss each one in detail. First is the anterior perivisceral sinus, which lies above the foot and beneath the floor of the pallial cavity surrounding the anterior part of the alimentary canal, and it collects blood supplied by the cephalic aorta except pericardial artery and some branches of the visceral aorta. Then anterior periintestinal sinus, which lies on the columnar axis next to the intestine in the terminal part of the genital duct and runs along the coils of the intestine up to the junction of the anterior and posterior renal chambers and collects blood from the viscera, mainly distributed by the visceral aorta. Then the bronchorenal sinus, which lies along the right side of the anterior renal chamber and collects blood from the renal chambers. Then is the pulmonary sinus, which lies on the wall of the pulmonary sac and it collects blood from the pulmonary sac. Next is the veins. The veins carry venous blood from different parts of the body to the auricle directly or through the gill, mantle, and kidney. The chief veins involved in these are as follows. First is the afferent tenoidal vein, which lies above the rectum and receives branches from the rectum terminal part of the genital duct, perivisceral sinus, and bronchorenal sinus. It sends blood through numerous branches to the gill lamella for purification. Second is the efferent tenoidal vein. It lies along the roof of the anterior renal chamber and carries blood from the tenoidal leaflets, mantle, and conveys to the auricle. Next is the afferent renal vein, which is situated on the roof of the posterior renal chamber and originates from the pre-intestinal sinus, and it pours its blood into the posterior renal chamber. Next is the efferent renal vein, which carries the blood of the posterior renal chamber to the auricle. Next is the pulmonary vein, which collects blood from the walls of the pulmonary sac and opens into the auricle. Next is the blood. The blood of gastropods contains a respiratory pigment called hemocyanin. which is a compound of copper and protein. Hemocyanin is dissolved in the plasma and gives a faintly blue color to the blood. But in few gastropods, such as Planorbis, hemoglobin is found in place of hemocyanin, which is an exception. In the blood plasma are stellate amoebocytes, which are phagocytic in nature and they remove waste substances, and some of them or carry on intracellular digestion also. Course of circulation. We will discuss course of circulation with the help of the following diagram. All parts of the body are supplied with the blood from the ventricle through the cephalic and visceral aorta. The cephalic aorta carries blood to the head and its associated structures, a part of the mantle, the buccal mass, the esophagus, the copulatory organ, and the columnar muscle. Whereas the visceral aorta supplies the whole of the visceral mass. The blood is collected from the various parts of the body into two main sinuses. Here you can see from the different organs of the body, it is carried to the two main sinuses, which are the perivisceral sinus and periintestinal sinus. From these two sinuses, the blood passes either into the, again they follow the two pathways. From perivisceral sinus, either the blood goes to the anterior renal chamber, then the branchiorenal sinus, afferent tenedial vein, afferent tenedial vein, and finally to the auricle. Or they may follow the second pathway, that is from perivisceral sinus to the branchiorenal sinus, afferent tenedial vein, tenedium, afferent tenedial vein, and then going to the auricle. The blood from the periintestinal sinus also follows the two pathways, either through the afferent renal sinus to the anterior renal chamber, then the branchiorenal sinus, afferent tenedial vein, tenedium, afferent tenedial vein to the auricle, or from afferent renal vein to the posterior renal chamber, passing through the afferent renal vein, which then finally reaches to the auricle. The other pathway followed by the perivisceral sinus is to the pulmonary sac, from the pulmonary sac to the pulmonary vein and to the auricle. Here, one thing is important, the auricle receives pure blood from the tenedium, that is from here by the afferent tenedial vein, and impure blood from the posterior renal chamber to the efferent renal vein and to the auricle. This mixed blood enters the ventricle and is distributed to the arteries. The main function of the renal chambers is to remove waste substances from the blood. So again, to summarize the course of circulation, two aorta, cephalic and visceral aorta are present. Cephalic aorta supplies blood to the head, part of mantle, buccal mass, esophagus, copulatory organ, and columnar muscle, whereas the visceral aorta supplies to the whole of the visceral mass. And from the different organs of the body, the blood is collected through two main sinuses, perivisceral sinus and periintestinal sinus. Perivisceral sinus follows two pathways, either through the anterior renal chamber or through the branchiorenal sinus reaching to the tenedium, and by afferent tineal vein to auricle, or and from posterior visual sinus to anterior renal chamber. Then again the same pathway, again reaching to the auricle through periintestinal sinus, two pathways again by afferent renal sinus to anterior renal chamber, finally reaching to the tenedium and then to the auricle, or by posterior renal chamber, then through the afferent renal vein to the auricle. So here the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mixes, and then it is passed to the ventricle and then to the cephalic and the visceral aorta. Thanks a lot for paying the attention. Thanks again.